We're wrapping up our series on anxiety, and we've been looking at so many different aspects of this issue that all of us face to some degree or another. And we looked at finances and relationships. Finances will cause some anxiety, won't they? Relationships and relational conflict. And we looked at work and school and these kinds of everyday issues that we go through. And we saw Paul's example when he was in unimaginable stress and uncertainty about his future, and how he wrote the words in Philippians 4, "Be anxious for nothing." Now look, if you've had an easy life and you're sitting in a plush upholstered chair with a fire going and a nice cup of hot whatever you like. What do you want, cider? All right, it's that time of year. And you say, be anxious for nothing. That doesn't really mean as much as if you're incarcerated and people are going from church to church trying to turn people away from you, and you know that there is a strong chance that you're going to be executed by the government and you didn't do anything wrong. And you say, be anxious for nothing. Those are two different kinds of things. I mean, they're the same words, right? And so Paul shows us, he doesn't tell us, he shows us that God is able to give us not a normal kind of peace, not a normal kind of serenity, but a supernatural ability to trust Him no matter what is going on in our lives. Now, and I'm not talking about being delusional. I'm not talking about saying, oh, it's going to tickle when they cut my head off. No, it's not going to tickle, Paul. And that's what happened to him. I mean, he was beheaded by the government. But you know what? He was able to trust God through the whole thing. And so today, and we looked at what Jesus taught as well, didn't we? We saw how Jesus talked about the birds. I think that's just probably one of the most brilliant statements. It's cliche for us because we've heard it so many times, but it's really a brilliant statement because Jesus preached outside mostly, right? And he's out there at the Sermon on the Mount, which we visited one of the potential spots that could be last year when we went to Israel. It's just a nice hillside right by the lake there. And you can just imagine there would be birds around. And he says, look at the birds. You know, they're not worried. And you know what? God takes care of them. Aren't you more valuable than a bird? You know, that the bird, if you know, we can learn from the birds, right? The birds trust God, and we're more valuable, so we can trust God. You know, and I love that. So we've been looking at this topic a lot. Today is our last time, and you know, this is really, I think, an opportunity for all of us. If you do struggle with anxiety, if it's something that you want to face, and we call this series, we didn't call it Anxiety's No Big Deal. We didn't call the series Anxiety is Easy to Overcome. No, we called it Facing Anxiety, because anxiety can be a very difficult thing for us, and it's something that you can run from or you can face. And I encourage you to face it today. You know, and I really believe that God is alive and that God can help you have a breakthrough. Even today, just this random day in the middle of October, beginning of October, that God can break into your life today. I believe that. And you know, we can talk about lifestyle changes. We can talk about a lot of things. And there's wisdom there. Don't get me wrong. There's wisdom there. Look, if you don't sleep at night, it's no wonder that you're stressed out in the day and you're making bad decisions. And you got to sleep, right? And if you watch all suspenseful TV right before you go to bed every night, guess what? You're going to have crazy dreams. You know, I mean, there's a lot of just common sense wisdom that we can incorporate in our lives. If you schedule every day so much that there's no time to relax, no time for peace, of course you're going to be worried. And you know what I mean? So all of that's true. I'm not undermining that, but I'm saying that there is something even beyond that where God can just deliver you from something. That a lot of times that kind of deliverance is not one time. That you need to go back to Him again and again and get that deliverance. So anyhow, with that excessively long introduction, let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 18. I want to look at the life of David And I think David can, just looking at what he was going through and how he handled it, I think he can be an example for us. I did a search online on our website for David in our sermon archive. You know, every single year we've preached on David 3 or 4 times since the very first year we started that, which was 2004. Did you know that? So here's another one. All right, 1 Samuel 18, verse 5. And David went out, 1 Samuel 18:5, and David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants, as they were coming home when David returned from striking down the Philistine. The women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines and songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. And this is the substance of their song. Doesn't seem like the most poetic lyrics. Yeah, I'm just going to say that. But I guess thousands rhymes, right? Look at this with me in verse 7. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Right? That's a real catchy tune. And they were singing it. And you just imagine in your mind, right? I mean, when in an ancient culture, you know, you win a battle. Guess what? There's a celebration. You know, the guys are celebrating, the ladies are celebrating, and you know they're singing these songs, and they've got the tambourines out, and there's probably a lyre or two in the mix, which is the ancient version of the guitar, and you know something to bang on to make a drum sound, right? I don't think it looked just quite like the Roland over there, but I mean they had something, and there's rejoicing, and they're singing these songs, and you know David's the new guy. Saul's a king, David's a soldier, you know, he's up and coming, but he's not really a significant person yet in the government. And verse 8, it says, Saul was very angry. This saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? Saul, it says, Saul, verse 9, eyed David from that day on. So the next day, David was playing the lyre for Saul, because Saul would get angry and he would get flustered, and David would play music for him just in private, just to calm him down. And Saul decided that he would take his spear and throw it at David. This is one of these moments in the Bible where I think to myself, I wish I could have seen how this went down. You know what I mean? Because, like, you don't just get a spear chucked at you every day, right? I mean, I haven't. And, you know, what was that? Obviously, he missed. Actually, he tried it twice. And I don't know, like, David's, you just imagine, okay, so, like, we had Jared up here. He was playing the guitar, right? And, you know, what if my father back there just decided, you know, I don't like that song, and threw a spear? And Jared's up here, and then he ducks, and it hits the wall where it says, no source found, you know, and pfft, wah, wah, wah. We got a spear just sticking out of the wall. What does Jared do at that point? He just keeps playing? Right? I mean, what did David do in that scenario? Did he just keep playing the lyre? He's like, all right, I'm going to take 5. Because it happened twice. And then, you know, some time passed, and David just continued leading the army. He's like, wow, you know, Saul's fits of anger are no joke, let me tell you. Then look at verse 17, skipping ahead a little. Then Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you for a wife. Now that's got to be confusing. You got spears flying at you one day, and another day the king says, you know what, I've got this daughter. I want you to have her as your wife. You know, I want you to be part of my family. And David is completely floored. Look at his response. He says, I will give her to you for a wife, only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battle. For Saul thought, here's the motive. Let not my hand be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. Verse 18, and David said to Saul, who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? Right? And so Saul thought, all right, I tried to kill him, but you know, it didn't work out. Probably would be bad for my reputation if I just killed like the soldier all the women are singing about. So, you know, the thing about war is that it's dangerous. It's inherently dangerous. People die every battle. We'll put him in the battle more And eventually, there's only so many times that, like, somebody's shooting an arrow and it misses you, right? Or so many times when the swords are flying and you're in the thick of it and you escape unscathed, right? There's only so many times that can happen. So we'll just increase the number of times he goes out to battle, and I'll motivate him here with my daughter, is what Saul's saying here. Because he says that only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles, and he's thinking, that the Philistines will kill him. Verse 19, but at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel the Maholathite for a wife. Now that is not right. Look, if you got fathers in the room, not that we do arranged marriage anymore, but if we did, don't do this. If you promise your daughter to a guy, follow through. But that didn't happen. And it says in verse 20, now Saul's daughter Michal loved David. And they told Saul, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be son-in-law. So, this is a dysfunctional family. You think you came from a dysfunctional... This is a dysfunctional family. My goodness. He promises the first daughter so that he'll fight more and die, and then gives her to somebody else, and then he recovers by saying, you know what, I got this other daughter. She's a real thorn in the side. She'll really do a number on him. Who is this guy? And she indeed was. She was a difficult person, and she did give David a hard time, even later on once he became king. And so he gives her, and he says, David, and he kind of like works through intermediaries, and he sends a message to David. David's like, who am I? I don't deserve to be, still he thinks he doesn't deserve to be the king's son-in-law. And David knows that his family doesn't have a lot of money. In those days, you had to pay a bride price, which was significant. And, so they're sending messages back and forth. And Saul says to him, you don't need a bride price. It's okay. It's all right. I know where you're from. You're basic, as we would say today. You're a basic guy, just basic. You're not royalty. You're not from some wealthy family. You don't have 1,000 cattle. Your dad's Jesse. And he's got some sheep, but so does everyone. So he says, you know what? Just give me 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Just think about that for a moment. How do you... I'm going to tread carefully. Try not to step in it here. Think of how to say this. How do you get 100 foreskins from the Philistines? Do you ring? Is it like the teen challenge people that ring the doorbell and like, can I get, a donation? To get a man. Okay. Well. So David goes. You use your own imagination. David goes. He comes back. Not with one bag of 100 foreskins, probably bloody and dripping, but 2. I'm sorry, come on. 2 bags. He comes back with 200 foreskins, and he gives them to Saul, and he's like, here's the bride price. Now, why do you think Saul gave him this job? So that he would have to do something so ridiculously dangerous. He'd have to kill all these guys, and you know what I'm saying? And so Saul's thinking he's going to get news back. Oh, David died in battle. Saul's probably already got the eulogy prepared. Oh, he was a great man. He had killed his 10,000s, and then he died. But I'm still here. Fear not. Your king lives, right? Saul's waiting for a message to come back that he's dead. And what happens instead? 200 Philistine... Now, what do you even do with that? Saul's just like, set him over there on the table. So, sorry, I visualize all this stuff when I read it, and that's a rough one. But so anyhow, Saul orders At this point, Saul's just done. He's just done. He's like, you know what? Let's just kill David. He's talking to his servants. His son Jonathan's there. He's like, let's just kill. Can you just kill him, please? One of you? And Jonathan says, Dad, David's never done anything to you. You're a loyal subject. Remember he killed Goliath? Remember how you were so happy that day when he killed Goliath and everyone rejoiced? And don't kill David without a cause. Don't sin against innocent blood. And Saul listens to his son, and he changes his mind. He's like, all right, I won't kill him. Well, then there was another battle with the Philistines, and David and his soldiers defeated them. And David came back, and once again, he's playing the lyre for Saul. And before you know it, there's that funny sound in the wind. And David somehow he missed him again. Maybe Saul was just really bad aim. I don't know. Let's hope so. And so at that point, David escaped. And now David knows, this is getting ridiculous. This is getting serious. And so he decides to talk to his wife, Michal, and ask her some insider information. And she says to him, you need to get out of here now. You're going to be dead by morning. There are spies. They are after you. The hit is already out. They're just waiting for a time to do it. And so she helps him. She lets him down the window out of the place where they were living, which was part of the big palace structure that Saul had built. And she lets him out of the window, and then she dresses up the bed to look like David's in it with some sort of goat hair for his head, and I guess maybe he was a hairy guy. And so then the servants say to his wife, he say, where's David? And she said, oh, he's sick. So they go back up to Saul, right? And Saul is just so done. He's like, what? Is he still breathing? And the servants say, well, he's sick. We couldn't kill him. He's sick. So you can't make this stuff up. So Saul says to the servants, all right, here's an idea. Just grab his whole bed and bring him to me. I'll just kill him myself. So they go in and they see that it's not really him in the bed, and that it's really an image and some goat hair and whatever else they had lying around. And so David escaped. Look at chapter 19. David escaped, and he went to a town called Ramah, where Samuel the prophet was. And I bet, I can't prove this, but I bet some of that Star Wars mythology probably found its origin with the old wise Samuel, who's got incredible insight. And I don't know if I can't prove that Yoda, which sounds a lot like Yada, which means he knew in Hebrew. Side point. I can't prove that was based on the Bible, but the Bible is always influencing people, isn't it? So let's look at what happens when Samuel gets in the mix. Verse 19, it was told Saul, behold, so David ran away. It was told Saul, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. This is chapter 19, verse 20. Then Saul sent messengers to David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying and Samuel standing as head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other messengers. They also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent other... I just read that. And Saul sent other messengers again a third time, and they also prophesied. So these messengers are... I don't think they're delivering a message like, hey, David, the weather for the week is going to be good or something. They're there to bring him back. He wants David back. He wants to kill David. He's done. Verse 22. So 3 times... can you imagine this man's frustration, Saul? He's tried everything. He's tried sly maneuvers, go fight the Philistines a lot. Every time he fights the Philistines, he wins, and he gets a higher reputation. Everything he tries to destroy him doesn't work. He sends messengers, and they get taken over, and they prophesy, and they're just useless. So Saul's like, you want a job done right? Verse 22. Then he himself went to Ramah, and came to the great well that is in Seku, and he asked, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they are at Naioth and Ramah. And he went there to Naioth and Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. You're going to love this. It came upon Saul also. He went and he prophesied until he came to Naioth and Ramah. And then verse 24 is worth the price of admission. And he too stripped off his clothes. Whoa, wait a second. When you prophesy, you strip off your clothes. I didn't see that this morning. Anyhow. And he too stripped off his clothes, and he too prophesied before Samuel and lay naked all that day and all that night. Whew! That's some prophecy. You think the Pentecostals are wild, huh? I mean, this is a whole nother level, right? Can you imagine how, like, the next day, Saul was just like, he wakes up naked in this foreign place, this unfamiliar place, and he thinks to himself, okay, all right, so I sent these messengers, that didn't work. I went myself, and I just have this like weird memory of prophesying day and night. What do you even do? So he goes home. That's what you do. He went home, and so David says, you know what, I'm going to get killed. I'm going to get killed. Like, somehow he's going to find some way around this like prophecy bubble of protection that, Samuel's got over here in Ramah. And, somehow he's going to figure it out, and I just need to run. So David flees. He comes to Jonathan. They have some back and forth there. And Jonathan confirms to David, you know what, my father is going to kill you. There's no question about it. I tried to reason with him, and he chucked the spear at me this time. And so, Saul threw a spear at his own son, missed again. Big surprise there. And so he tells David, now David is officially on the run. He stops at a priest there. He's on the run. He comes to a priest, Ahimelech, and he got some quick supplies. He asked for a sword. And the priest's like, well, we've got Goliath's old sword over in the corner. David's like, well, there's nothing like that one. And he's like, I'll take that. And so he's taken off with Goliath's sword. And he goes to Gath, which is the city Goliath is from, right? And the king's servant recognized David. We're going to go to chapter 21. So David's just like walking around Gath. He's trying to hide from Saul. Where do you go? The enemy, the Philistines. And they recognize him. They're like, isn't this the guy? Saul has killed his thousands. He's killed his 10,000 of us. Isn't that the guy? Isn't that old Goliath sword he's carrying? What, does he walk around with the thing? Like these days you do a 5K, you get a medal. You like wear it every day. You know what I mean? Like, this is David carrying the sword around. And they grab him and they bring him to the king. Chapter 21, verse 12. And David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them. This is chapter 21, verse 13. So he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands and made marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. That's an interesting move. Unless you've read this before, didn't see that one coming. Okay, just act like you're crazy. His spit's running down his beard, and he's scratching on the gate of the door and all this. Verse 14, then Achish said to his servants, it totally worked, by the way, behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? He's like, get this guy out of here. I got enough madmen as it is. I don't need another one. Get him out of here. So David departs from there, chapter 22, verse 1, and he goes to a cave. You know why? Because, a cave it's not going to kill you. It's a relatively safe place, not the most pleasant place. But he goes to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. David would go on to live in exile for 8 years. 8 years he would live in exile, give or take. Maybe it's not exactly 8, but around 8 years. About 4 years on the run from Saul, from cave to cave. And then 4 years living among the Philistines in his own village. Ziklag is where he was. But it would be 8 years before he comes home. Now that's a long period of time. Think of what your life was like 8 years ago, what you were doing, what your take on the world was. And think about it today. It can be a significant amount of time. So Saul would relentlessly hunt him during this period. We're going to go to Psalm 34 next. Psalm 34. So Saul would relentlessly hunt David during this period of 4 years. There was one time that David and his men were on one side of a mountain, and their mountains are a little more like hills than like our mountains. And so, David and his merry band of discontents and his family, they're all on one side of this little mountain. And then Saul and his professional soldiers, well-fed and well-supplied with their proper weapons and so on, is on the other side. And David and his men are going this way, and Saul and his men are going this way, and Saul and his men are catching up. And they're just doing this like peekaboo around the mountain here. And just as they're about to capture David, and it's going to be over, they get a message, the Philistines have attacked. We got to go. Another time, David and his men are in a cave, and suddenly, who walks in? Saul himself. And he picks David's cave. I mean, how close do you have to be using his cave as a bathroom? You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine after he left and the guys, because the guys told David to kill him, and he said, no, he's not going to kill the Lord's anointed. He's trying to stay away from Saul. But dude ruined the cave, man. Look what he left us, Can you imagine that? 4 years being chased and being on the run. Would you have anxiety? If you didn't have anxiety, there'd be a problem with you because somebody's literally trying to kill you. I mean, that's a justified sense of anxiety. This is not a condition. This is proper, right? And you would be anxious because you're being hunted down. So David knows some things about anxiety, I think, that can help us. How did David deal with his anxiety? And that's the great thing. We're going to Psalm 34. That's the great thing about the Psalms, is they really tell us what was on the inside. I read to you from Samuel. It tells us what was going on. It's a historical narrative. But then we go to the Psalms and we find the heart. What was the heart? Where was David at? And we see in Psalm 34, at the heading there, it says, of David when he changed his behavior before Abimelech so that he drove him out and he went away. We can't be too sure about these headings in the Psalms. It's not entirely clear how accurate they are, whereas, the psalm itself we know is inspired, but it sounds like the same incident. The name's a little different. Abimelech maybe was a title. It means my father, the king. For Achish, that's possible. But even if this psalm doesn't have to do with David's incident there, it still shows us how David dealt with fear and how he dealt with worry and anxiety. So verse 1 there says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. I mean, that's really the key verse there, verse 4. He said, I sought the Lord. I pursued God, and he delivered me. He answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those, verse 5, who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. Oh, taste, I love this one. Can't miss this one. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Question, do you take refuge in God when you're facing anxiety, when you are worried, when you have fear? Whether these fears are rational or irrational, that's not really the point. The point is, in your time of difficulty, in your time of suffering and trial, when you are worried, do you take refuge in God? You see that right at the end there. Blessed is the man who takes, in verse 8, blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. He doesn't say, God is my refuge. He says, take refuge. That means you've got to do something. Think about it like this. Have you ever been out, maybe you were shopping, and suddenly a big storm hit? And it's thunder and it's lightning, and you take refuge, right? And then there's some people that run out to their cars and they don't take refuge and they get wet, right? Or what about a snowstorm where it's just like icy on the roads and it's very maybe you're out somewhere when the storm hits and you decide, I'm going to take refuge here? Okay, how much more so if you're outside and like something that could happen in a desert, suddenly a sandstorm comes, right? Let's say you're outside and suddenly, and I don't know, maybe you're on a safari in Egypt or something, and suddenly a sandstorm comes. And what do you do if you're in the middle of nowhere? You just find something big to hide behind or in. You know, if you can find a cave, you can just stand under a tree. If you find a big rock and you crouch down next to it, you find whatever you can to take refuge. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what God is. When the storm comes, you go to Him to take refuge. You don't just sit out in it. You know what I mean? You got to take refuge. Verse 8 again. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. He doesn't say, hey, remember, the Lord is good. He doesn't say, believe the Lord. He says, taste and see. This is an experience. He wants you to, just if I say, taste and see that Megan, the champion from last year's chili contest, that her chili is good. If I say, taste and see that her chili is good, I'm not giving you a theology. I'm giving you instruction on something to do. Put it in your mouth and eat it. Right? And so when we look at this as what the psalm is saying, metaphorically, what we're talking about is experiencing that God is good. How do you experience? You take refuge in Him. You got to face your anxiety and your worries and your fears. Let's go to 55, Psalm 55. The Psalms just have so much to teach us on this subject. I wish we could read through so many more, but we'll just look at a few here. Did you know that fear is the sort of thing that grows in the darkness? That, there are cases where, for example, let's say a child is afraid of getting stung by a bee. And so the child doesn't want to go outside. And then the parent says, well, let's just protect the child from going outside and, do everything possible to enable the child to never have to go outside unnecessarily. And if the child goes outside, you give the child a beekeeper suit or, some like excessive protection, right? And, you know what that does to that fear? It makes it increase over time. Yeah, it makes it increase. You know what the best thing for a child afraid of going outside and getting stung by a bee is? To get stung by a bee. I know that sounds incredibly cruel, but the fact of the matter is, the fear in your head is bigger than the reality a lot of the time, right? And especially for children, because they don't have a realistic view of the world yet. They're just, everything's a big deal to them. And so we have to, and that's just fear in general. We have to face our fears. We can't just run and run and run and run and run. At some point, we got to face our fears. And I suggest that if you're going to do that, you do it with God. You don't do it alone, because it could go sideways, right? You want to do it with God. And so look at 55 here. 55:1. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my plea for mercy. Look, this isn't like just nice words. This is somebody's prayer. Somebody's saying to God, listen to me, please. This is my plea. And then what does he say? Verse 2, attend to me, answer me. I am restless in my complaint, and I moan. This person is having a bad day, right? They're restless. They're complaining. They're moaning. God, please listen to my complaint. He goes on. Verse 3, what's going on? Because of the noise of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they drop trouble upon me, and in anger they bear a grudge against me. My heart is in anguish within me. You know that feeling you get inside? Maybe you feel it in your stomach. Maybe you feel it in your chest, that feeling of anguish, that feeling of fear. Look at this next part. My heart is in anguish within me. Verse 4, the terrors of death have fallen upon me. He's in terror. This person, this is it says a Psalm of David, right? That this time in his life, he was in anguish. His stomach was in knots. His chest was tight. He was in terror of death. And it says, verse 5, fear and trembling come upon me, and horror overwhelms me. Just imagine, you're trembling. You can't even hold your hand still. You're shaking. You're physically shaking because of the fear. And what does he say? Verse 6, and I say, oh, that I had wings like a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. Yes, I would wander far away. I would lodge in the wilderness, Selah. I would hurry to find a shelter from the raging wind and tempest. He's like, I want to disappear. I want to escape. I want to leave and not tell anybody and then go somewhere else. Understandable. But then in verse 16, we get the but. But I call to God. That's the turning point. But I call to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and noon I utter my complaint and moan, and He hears my voice. You go to God, and look, I tell you what, we go to God, and we pray, and we don't get our answer. And you know what we say? That's it. I quit. I'm out of here. He didn't answer my prayer. I'm not doing this Christianity thing anymore. I'm going over here. I'll find some other thing to do. There's something a little more likable in the morning, and I'm out of here. Right? That's what we do. We say, I'm done. I don't want to have anything. I was in pain. I prayed, and God didn't answer me. I quit. Right? That's what we say. This guy, he prays morning, noon, and night. Look what he says here. It says, evening, look at verse 17, evening and morning and at noon, I utter my complaint and moan. These aren't just like, dear Father, please help me if you can. No, he's moaning. You ever moaned? You ever complain? You're so miserable that it's just like, ugh. That's the kind of prayer we're talking about here. And you read the Psalms, they're real. They're not fake. They're not dressed up. They're not like airbrushed over and with a big smiley face. No, there's real heart in the Psalms. And a lot of times the Psalms don't end in a happy place. You know why? Because they're true to life. And a lot of times we go through stuff and it isn't happy. But we don't have to go through it alone. That's what he's not doing. He's not going through it alone. Look at verse 16 again. But I call to God, and the Lord will save me. Evening and morning and noon I utter my complaint and moan, and He hears my voice. Verse 18. He redeems my soul in safety from the battle that I wage, for many are arrayed against me. God will give ear and humble them, He who is enthroned of old, Selah, because they do not change and do not fear God. My companion stretched out his hand against his friends. He violated his covenant. His speech was smooth as butter, yet war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawn swords. Verse 22, here's the key. Cast your burden on the Lord. That's what you got to do. You cast your burden on the Lord, and He will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be removed or to be moved. But you, O God, will cast them down into the pit of destruction. Men of blood and treachery shall not live out half their days, but I will trust in you. This is the posture of a believer. It's not delusional, it's realistic. And what we do is we hold God's hand through the storm. We go to Him, we take refuge in Him. And there are some things in our life that God, in His incredible grace, will just take away. And there's other things that we just have to go through, right? And when we go through those things, I suggest that you don't throw the timer across the stage because that could break. Or go hide in the amp closet because that would mess up what Jim's doing back there with the sound. That's not the kind of thing to do. That's bad. That's a bad example. That's not what we do. We don't quit and all this. What we do is we go through it with God and with the people of God. We're here for each other, right? Amen. So what I'd like to do then is pick up my timer, and I'd like to have the praise team come up. It says 0 now. That's not really going to help anybody. That's not going to help. It still works, though. That's good. Psalm 118. Let's go look at one last place. Psalm 118, verse 5. What I'd like to do is give you an opportunity this morning to get prayer. And we're going to have some folks over here under that light on the side there, and we're going to stand there. And if you'd like to come forward for prayer during the last song, we'd like to pray with you. And that if there is some fear pushing you around, if there is worry, if there is anxiety, and you'd just like to pray with a brother or sister, that you would be able to do that this morning. And like I said before, I'm not joking. I think God is here, and you can have a breakthrough right now. That's what I really believe. Look at Psalm 118, verse 5. Out of my distress, I called on the Lord. The Lord answered me and set me free. Out of my distress, I called on the Lord. The Lord answered me and set me free. So if in your distress this morning, you want to call upon the Lord and you want somebody to do that with, I invite you to meet me over here while they're singing.
Found you in the middle of my mess. You had been there all along. Open arms and open heart, you called me in. You didn't hesitate at all. And the lies I once believed, they crumble with the weight of your truth. And the fear that gripped my heart is arrested so that I can see you. When I only see in parts, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God, 'cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe you, God.
But now, thus says Yahweh, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name, and you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame will not consume you. For I am Yahweh, your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt as your ransom, Cush and Seba in exchange for you. Because you are precious in my eyes and honored, I love you. I give men in return for you, peoples in exchange for your life.
Set a table in the middle of my war. You knew the outcome of it all. When what I faced looked like it would never end, you said, watch the giants fall. And the lies I once believed, they crumble with the weight of your truth. And the fear that gripped my heart is arrested so that I can see you. And when I only see in parts, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God, 'cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe you, God. And when I only see in part, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God. 'Cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe you, God. And fear can go to hell, and shame can go there too. I know whose I am. God, I belong to you. And fear can go to hell, and shame can go there too. I know whose I am. God, I belong to you. And fear can go to hell, and shame can go there too. I know whose I am. God, I belong to you. Fear can go to hell, and shame can go there too. I know whose I am. God, I belong to you. I belong. And when I only see in part, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God. 'Cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe you, God. And when I only see in parts, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God. 'Cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe you, God. And when I only see in part, I will prophesy your promise. I believe you, God. 'Cause you finish what you start, and I will trust you in the process. I believe